What happens when one of our noblest pursuits is co-opted by one of our darkest, most destructive prejudices? Nothing good. Here are 5 dangerous things about scientific racism. Number 1, it intellectualizes racism. The term scientific racism refers to attempts to use valid scientific research in fields such as genetics or anthropology to validate racist ideas, most commonly the idea that certain races are inherently superior or inferior to others. The current and long-standing opinion of the overwhelming majority of scientists is that race is too ambiguous and informal of a concept to be of much use to science, and furthermore, there is no evidence whatsoever to substantiate the notion that racial differences, however we might define those, play a significant role in determining the behavior and abilities of people. In other words, scientific racism is definitely racism, but it sure ain't science. Number 2, it confuses science with pseudoscience. Scientific racism is a relatively modern term for a collection of theories and ideologies that began popping up in the 18th century. It was Carl Linnaeus, the great Swedish botanist and father of modern taxonomy, who laid the foundation for much of scientific racism by categorizing humanity into 4 distinct racial groups: American, meaning indigenous Americans; European, meaning white Europeans; African, meaning black people; and Asian, which he first described as brown and then later revised to yellow. Though the idea that there are significant biological differences between racial groups is no longer widely accepted in the scientific community, in scientific racist circles it remains a fundamental dogma. Other pseudoscientific concepts with close ties to scientific racism include phrenology, the idea that the size and shape of the cranium is an indicator of intelligence or moral character, and biological determinism, the notion that human behavior is entirely determined by genetic factors. Making racism sound superficially scientific undermines genuine science, but it does something even more harmful than that. Number 3, it justifies social inequality. To purveyors of scientific racism, it makes perfect sense that black folks and other people of color are underprivileged compared to white folks because people of color suffer from certain genetic disadvantages that make it virtually impossible for them to compete with white people, and in particular, white men. Under this view, programs such as public assistance for people with low incomes or affirmative action are futile efforts to alter the natural state of things. Racial inequalities and other perceived injustices in our society might feel unfair to the people experiencing them, but there's really nothing anyone can do about them. It's just the way things are. It's not racist. It just so happens that white people actually are superior. Except that's not actually true, but so what? As long as people believe it, right? And what happens when enough people believe it? Number 4, it empowers and legitimizes white supremacists. You know which group of people really love scientific racism? I'll give you a hint, it's not scientists. It's the other one. For instance, alt-right founding father Jared Taylor. He loves the idea that white folks are genetically superior to black folks because if that's true, then he seems like less of an asshole for saying things like, quote, "When blacks are left entirely to their own devices, Western civilization, any kind of civilization, disappears." Who else? Oh, how about David Duke, arguably the most famous white supremacist in the United States. Duke once said, quote, "Are facts racist too? It's considered noble to concern yourself with the well-being of minorities even at the farthest ends of the earth, but if you're white and you concern yourself with the well-being of your own people, even of your own children, you're deemed racist. The real racism today is not by white people. It's against white people." He's been preaching scientific racism since the 1970s. But some of you might be wondering why I chose to make this video now. Is this another instance of me getting a wild hair up my ass about a particular subject, like that video about the John Wilkes Booth conspiracy theory a few weeks back? No. Actually, I wanted to discuss scientific racism for a very specific reason. Number 5, it's making a comeback. A couple of months ago, a fairly high-profile author and podcaster had a well-known scientific racist as a guest on his podcast. Now, I don't want to tell you who this podcaster was. I'll just give you a hint and say that his name rhymes with Ham Saris, and it was Sam Harris. His guest on a show titled Forbidden Knowledge was Charles Murray, co-author of The Bell Curve, a book that purported to show that there was a link between race and intelligence. Murray's book was thoroughly discredited and roundly rejected by the scientific community following its initial publication over 20 years ago for its questionable research and wholly unsupported conclusions, but Harris treated him like some kind of intellectual king in exile, blaming Murray's outcast status on political correctness run amok. Like any good work of scientific racism, The Bell Curve provided racists with an intellectual-sounding justification for their racism. Sure, it doesn't even remotely reflect the opinions of experts in the relevant field, but who needs scientific consensus when you've got enablers like Sam Harris who are all too willing to lend an old white supremacist like Charles Murray a bit of their credibility to help spread that message to a whole new audience? A message which, I remind you, boils down to white people are genetically superior to non-white people. Sound familiar? The hardest part is picking only 5. Catch you next time. Hey folks, hope you got something out of this one. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks for watching.